Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the GosuGamers CSGO Pro Tips, brought to you in part by the Pinnacle Cup 2. It's my third and final video in this video series. I'm of course TheEternalJay, and I'm going to miss you guys, certainly. It's definitely been a fun time sort of teaching you a few things that I've certainly picked up on in my time as a caster, but of course to remind you all of these videos are being done in association with the Pinnacle Cup 2. The event is currently, I think, Swiss round number 4 if memory serves me correctly, and definitely you want to be tuning into all that, where some of these pro tips might actually be used by the pros themselves, so you can get a bit of an idea of how it's used in application and how you can improve your own game from there as well. If you want to keep up with all the tournament action, then there's a link below in the video description, or you can go to GosuGamers.net for all the statistics and streams and more information about the tournament. So in today's video, we're taking a look at both of the respective halves of the game here. We're talking about CT and T sides. Now, whilst Counter-Strike itself is very, very similar in terms of its mechanics on both halves, the way you play CT and T is very, very different to one another. Just by nature, it's basically attack and defense, essentially. So I kind of want to go through a few things of what you can be able to do specifically in each individual half, so you can sort of get a decent idea as to how they can be different from each other and what you can do to start to turn the tide of the matchup in your own favor as an individual. Even though Counter-Strike plays mechanically similar on both sides, at the end of the day, they're two very, very different roles. So I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks here and there to show you exactly what you can do to be able to play a good CT and T half over the course of your matches. Now, the points that I have for both individual sides are more about team basis, because one of the things that I've noticed a lot is that as an individual, you can very easily sort of play out your own style of game and make it somewhat successful, but what's going to really turn your matches into decent glory is understanding how to utilize certain more advanced elements like utility and team play. So I'm going to go through a few little bits and pieces. We'll start things off with the CT side. Now, my first tip for the CT side is to know your defensive line. Now, that might seem a little bit basic to a lot of people at first, but let me explain in a bit more detail what I'm talking about. The defensive line is not just the positions that you hold as a CT, but also the positions you look to peek to. So, for example, yes, you might have a player on the B site, but is that player holding back a car looking out into the open, or is he looking into the tunnel's entrance from platform, for example? Well, those are different things of what the CT defensive line is. So if you break the defensive line, then you're going to have to know not only what you're conceding, but how you're going to get it back and what you can get back safely. The defensive line will always shift quite a lot, I think, over the course of a matchup, depending on what you need to do specifically in the CT side. So let's take a look at an example here of what I'm talking about on the CT side of Dust 2. Now, Dust 2 is a very common map. You're probably going to be playing it a lot, so might as well give you a bit of a tip here in that respect. Now, I've got here a CT holding the B site and one holding mid. Now, this is a pretty common setup for a lot of CT forces, because usually we're having 3 players pushed up towards the long control, watching for a T side aggressive play in from the longhouse very early into the matchup, and if you can't shut that down, you can lose the A site very quickly. So these 2 players will be left to defend mid and B site entirely of their own accord, and something that might happen is if they press through tunnels, then only that one B site defender is really going to be capable of doing anything. So that AWP needs to provide support, and if he rotates away to look away from mid and look towards the B site, then now he's basically conceded mid control entirely, and that means that the players over on the A site are going to have to rotate back out along to try and hold position and look towards the short control instead, in case the T's do push up from catwalk and try to take the A site from that angle, because that angle is now being conceded. And in the event that there is no execution at all, then the AWP wants to try and retake mid, but you can't just reset to the same positions as you did before. You have to know not only where you can hold by default, but when you can see the position, how much of that position you can get back. Like, if the AWP just willy-nilly peeks right back in towards mid and looks all the way up towards top, then he's probably going to get caught off by a player who's now set himself up with that time, that window being given to look down towards the mid of the CT side instead. So rather than refacing and looking up towards top mid again, maybe you might want to hold back and look at Xbox, or maybe look towards the catwalk position, and you know, keep your eyes on the main entrance towards the A side. That way you can potentially get a kill, potentially get some information, and call out info towards the A side players, so that way their defensive line can shift depending on how the T side are playing. That way you can still be useful without having to get a kill. It's not all about kills in Counter-Strike. Sometimes there's a bit more of information in team play, and if you can hold that information position, if you can try and bottleneck the T side and get info to where they're going to go, if they're going to go towards that short control, then that's going to help your team out so much more than if you just faced in and potentially got a kill, maybe lost it, probably lost it, honestly, given the circumstances of how you consider that mid control. Now, the second tip I'm going to give you is along similar lines to the whole defensive line thing, but has a bit more to do with retakes and rotations. Now, one of the common mistakes I've seen made across across Counter-Strike is that people call in rotations far too early. They say they're all out towards this position, and everyone rotates, everyone holds a defense, and then, you know, they're down to a 3 versus 3 situation, and they've cleaned up everybody over on that one position, and over on the other side of the map, they've got the bomb plant. So that's the key thing, I think, to understand here, is to know when you need to rotate. And usually the positions where you want to rotate are when you've seen the bomb or when you've seen the majority of players. Seeing 1 or 2 individuals should not really be constitution for a full-on rotation, unless, of course, those 2 individuals have gotten every player on your defensive. That's when you should also rotate to get yourself set up for a retake. And the other thing as well to understand is not only just when to rotate, but also how to rotate. Like, it's all great full sending back in towards CT spawn to try push up towards long, but if they've already got the site, you might want to play towards short or long itself and try and go for a retake scenario with the rest of your teammates. Because, yeah, it might be super cool if you, like, just ran straight into the site and sprayed everybody down, but the chances of that actually happening are pretty minimal, to say the least. So understanding those retake positions, when to go for a retake or when to go for a definitive defensive, and you know, just generally how to rotate, when to do so, is something I think you might work on all sorts of maps. And the timings are different, the situations are different depending on each of the maps itself. So experiment a little bit, give it a bit of a test, and give it some try in some pug matches, or just in general towards scrimmage. Actually, I think you can play in most of the scrimmage matches these days in Counter-Strike, so that's a bit of a risk-free environment for you to test things out. And the third thing I'm going to say is use utility carefully. Now, I know that a lot of people might probably understand this pretty nicely of their own right, but the thing to note is that if you don't see a reason to use utility, then it's probably a good chance you don't need to use it overall. There are some scenarios where, yes, you do want to put a bit of a wild nade in, or an incendiary down in a position where you think that there might not be a T-side player, but that might be worth it, because if you can gain that position back using a nade or a Molotov, then you can actually go pretty far in terms of actually taking back map control away from the T-side. But stuff like smokes, for example, going back to the Dust 2 example, for instance, if you use smokes on towards tunnels, like, that might only be necessary to start off the round here. But if you've got the backup platform held, then there's no reason to really re-smoke the angle until you see T-side contact. So try and utilize it a bit more sparingly, I think is the right word for that, because you might need that smoke to actually hold off a real execution later down the road. So be a bit more careful with it. Try not to get baited by the T-side either, because the one thing that the T-side can do is use their own utility to bait in your own utility of your own right. So just be a little bit careful with it. Try and get a decent read, and don't use it unless you absolutely feel it's necessary. Now, going over to the T side, the thing I want to talk about the most here is all about communication to start things off. Communicate. Absolutely communicate with your teammates. Communicate as much information as you can. Make calls and make decisions. Have someone be a definitive leader for the T side, because this requires a lot more coordination than the CT side. Like, at the very least in CT, you can sort of hold your positions with a teammate, maybe play off a trade angle, and just wait until the execution comes towards you, and you can be somewhat successful in that respect. The same that cannot be said for the T side. You have to be the ones forcing the issue. And the way you force the issue mostly is by coordinating your attacks. To be able to deepen your T side is going to be something that will catch the CTs off guard. They might not be ready for everything that you're going to throw at them. I'm not saying go and try and get some complicated Astralis strats involved in your matchmaking games, but, you know, crucial info and better plays will always come from the communication. So utilize that and be able to call out tactics and strategies on the fly. Maybe call out a certain execution. Like, maybe example, you might want to go for a B plane. It's like, okay, well, you know, if anyone has a smoke, can you smoke down the main entrance, or can you smoke the B doors, for instance? Or, you know, you're using your teammates to flash you in for a kill, for example. Like, if you're out in the tunnels and you want to peek in towards the B side, then it might not be a good idea to peek blind. But if you say, hey, pop flash me in, you face the wall, then your teammate can flash you over, you can take the peek, and you can get the kill instead. And it's a good thing to talk about utility as well, because I think one of the also key things as well is to be able to learn your utility usage. Learn all the smokes of the T-side line, all the flashes that you can use, the Molotovs, and where they'll be the most useful and effective. One of the most common sort of like low-level strategies that I've seen everyone from amateur teams to professional teams use is the A-site set piece over on Mirage. And that's the set piece that you often see where they smoke the connector jungle cross, the stairs cross, and sometimes even CT spawn, and burst into the site, siphoning off the passive defenders of the A-site. That's only ever become viable because people have learned how to use the utility and what the utility is they use. And that doesn't just apply towards team play strategies, it can also apply to individual players. Like, going back to Mirage, for example, if you wanted to execute B site, in theory you could do that all on your lonesome by setting up a window smoke, for example, towards market window, molotoving off the back of van, and 2 flashes out of the apartment's window to jump face, look towards short, deal with the player that might have been mollied away from van, deal with the player that might have been over on towards short, get that bomb plant, and you've basically solo taken the site. It's not easy, but it's possible, and it's possible with utility. As I mentioned so many times over the course of these videos, is that utility can be the most important factor in any matchup. So learn it. Learn those set piece smokes, learn those cross-map smokes, learn those default smokes as well, because those will be very important. You can't just peek out mid without someone being watching there for the CT side, for instance. So if you can learn to smoke off Xbox or learn to smoke off Sniper's Nest, then you're going to have a really good time. And the final thing I want to say about the T side as well is to be disciplined, okay? Not every game can be won by rushing B. Just going to say that right now. Like, sometimes it might be better for you to try and bait in a man advantage. Try and see if you can get a CT to make a mistake and punish him for that mistake, whether that be through errors in their own defensive line or through greatness in your own offensive line. If you can be able to get a nade on towards a CT player who's held in a corner, double it up and get that kill in, then all power to you. That means now you've got one player less to deal with when it comes to getting into the site. And if you can use that discipline to take map control away, then you're going to force the CTs to be very, very heavily pressured. They're not going to be held back in towards one position and expecting you to come from one angle and be able to deal with that so easily. If you can get CT mid over on Dust 2, then you can go from 2 angles of attack, and that B site can be spread so thin at times. So with you playing a bit more patiently, you have 2 minutes on the clock, you've got all that time to work in. So work in, you know, just be a bit more disciplined, be a bit more patient, and be a bit more of a smarter T side player, if you will. And there you go. Those are a few more tips and tricks that you can utilize on the CT and T sides of your next few matches. I hope you've learned something there, and I hope you've probably got a bit more of a better basis to work from. I realize that some of these tips might seem a little bit vague, but trust me, if you have that mentality in your head of what it is you want to do, then you'll be able to apply it relatively well. But this has been the last of my GosuGamers Pro Tips video, so I hope you guys have been enjoying it. If you have, then please make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. I read them all, and I just want to know, did you find it helpful? Did you not? Do you think it was terrible? Let me know. I really do appreciate any of the feedback in the comments. And remember, the Pinnacle Cup is still ongoing. It's ongoing until the 16th of July, so make sure you're tuning in, of course, over at GosuGamers.net, where all the statistics and information will be there for you, and all the live streaming links will also be there for you to take a look and tune in. I'll be covering the playoffs there, so you won't be seeing the last of me if you tune into that tournament. But that's all you have time for on the video today, and that's all the time we have for on the channel. Once again, I've been TheEternalJay. I want to thank you all so much for watching and for listening over the course of the last couple of weeks, and hopefully I'll see you back here very soon for even more GosuGamers Pro Tips.